but Bob reckons BMW stands for Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Have you made a lot of money out of your music?
Money? I mean, how much is a lot of money to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Have you made, say, millions of dollars?
No.
Are you a rich man?
When you mean rich, what you mean?
Do you have a lot of possessions? A lot of money in the bank?
Position make you rich? I don't have that type of richness. My richness is life, forever.
Hello everybody, you're welcome back again to the Reggae Appreciation Society. On February 19th in 1990, Bob Marley's younger brother, Anthony, was taken out of this world after an armed confrontation with the police. It was yet a new tragedy for the Marley family, and especially for the family's matriarch in Cedella Booker. She had lost Bob to cancer 9 years earlier, only to lose her last child, Anthony, in even more brutal circumstances. The circumstances that led to Bob's brother's death were a direct fallout of the Tuff Gong's own death and the vicious battle that would erupt over his assets. A legal feud that was very complex and lengthy, stretching over an almost 30-year period. It was a saga that tested the endurance and sanity of all those that the Tuff Gong left behind before it was finally settled and a semblance of peace would return. But by the time the dust had settled, it had claimed the life of Bob's younger brother. To get to the bottom of this story, we have to go back to the very passing of the Tuff Gong himself. On 21st of September 1980, Bob Marley collapsed while jogging at the Central Park in New York City during the American leg of the Uprising album tour. When he was taken to the hospital, it was found that the cancer, which had been discovered 3 years earlier in his toe, had spread all over his body, and the doctors would give him a few months to live. But despite the fact that he was dying, Bob wouldn't write a will due to the fact that it went against his Rasta principles, and not to mention, he believed lawyers and accountants were devilish people. So when he passed away in May 1981, his estate had to be administered as intestate, a legal term for when a person dies without a will. And under Jamaica's intestate laws, Rita Marley was entitled to a percentage of all of her husband's assets alongside the children. But while it was being processed, it was discovered that Bob's lawyer and accountants had done some shady deals, and that would bring that process to a temporary halt. And to crown it all, many other people in Bob's life felt they had a stake in Bob's estate and went to court to fight for their share. In addition to Bob's widow Rita, we had the members of Bob's band, the Wailers, battling for royalties. Then Chris Blackwell, the then owner of Island Records, who was battling to buy Bob Marley's catalogue of songs, copyrights, and all of his assets. And then you had a Jamaican bank named Mutual Security that was appointed administrator by the court. And last but not least, a publishing company called Cayman Music that was owned by American showbiz entrepreneur Danny Sims and American singer Johnny Nash. Bob had been signed to Sims and Nash companies earlier in his career as an artist under their label Jad Records and as a songwriter under Cayman Music, and were fighting for the right to a $6 million payout as damages for violation of their contract with the late Tuff Gong. All these characters and the tens of millions of dollars involved would result in the lives of those Bob left behind becoming something of a living hell. Despite Bob's complicated family life, he'd always managed to steady that ship and kept everybody united, from his different baby mothers, their children, his bandmates, his mother, everybody. But when he passed on, chaos would descend upon that clan. It became a battle with external parties like the lawyers and the banks on their necks, and worst of all, it would split the Marley family right down the middle, and would lead to the death of Bob's younger brother, Anthony Booker. Anthony was the youngest child of his mom, Cedella Booker, by her American husband, Edward Booker, whom she had married after leaving Jamaica and arriving in America in 1963. Cedella had lived in Delaware with her husband and kids, but after Mr. Booker died in 1976, Bob decided to move his mom to the warmer climate in Miami, Florida, as the cold in Delaware had been aggravating her arthritis. Bob told his manager, Don Taylor, to find a nice house to buy for his mother, and Taylor went ahead to find a lovely home befitting of Bob's mom in a nice neighborhood in South Dade, Miami, and it was purchased in 1977. And Bob's mom would move in with her 3 children, and that house became the Marley family's US headquarters. Bob's son, Rohan and Julia Marley, also practically lived there, not to mention Bob's wife and girlfriends becoming frequent visitors. And it was soon after Bob bought that house that he learned that he had cancer. And by 1980, after his collapse in New York, He would also take refuge at the house during his grueling battle with cancer and spend time there with his family until his eventual passing at the University of Miami Hospital in May 1981. Soon after his passing, the aforementioned legal battles would begin and would turn Anthony Booker's life upside down. And embedded in the complex web of lawsuits and legal challenges was the very house that Bob had bought for his mother. It was the very place where Anthony had known as home since the age of 6, but unfortunately, Bob had bought that house in his own name. So when the fight for Bob's assets began, the bank named Mutual Security began to pull strings to recover it as part of the Marley estate, with a view to selling it with the rest of Bob's assets to Chris Blackwell. And this would force Bob's mom directly into the fray, and the pressures, intimidation, and intrigue she suffered would hit young Anthony the hardest. From the age of 10, Anthony saw his mother harassed and bullied by lawyers and banks with the fear of eviction looming over them. And by the age of 19, something would finally snap in Anthony's mind. On February 14, 1990, Anthony, who had just returned from Jamaica, would lock himself up in his bedroom and spent 4 days isolated, fasting and praying, and on February the 19th, took a 12-gauge shotgun and walked into a shopping mall not too far from his home. The police were called to the scene, and after a standoff, Anthony opened fire and was shot dead by the police at the young age of 19. Toxicology tests showed there were no drugs or alcohol in his system, and he also had no criminal records or medical issues. Anthony was simply a victim of severe depression and deep-rooted sadness that was brought about by an unfortunate scramble for his brother's money. A year after he passed away, the courts in Jamaica awarded the Marley estate and all, including Bob's mother's house, to the Marley family. That meant that Bob's mom's home was safe, but the costs had been terrible. Not only did Anthony pass away, but Cedela's only daughter, Pearl Livingston, who was also Bonnie Wheeler's half-sister, would fall into depression and drug abuse that would derail her budding musical career. But incredibly, the battle for Bob's empire would go on for 20 years longer and finally came to a close in 2012 after a trademark infringement lawsuit between Anthony's elder brother Richard and Bob's children was settled out of court. Today, the Marley empire is worth about $200 million and raked in $16 million in 2023. But ironically, despite all this wealth and money flying around, Bob himself wasn't a person that valued material possessions, in stark contrast to so many people that he had around him. And one of the last statements that he made before he passed on were his famous words, "Money can't buy life." I can almost bet that if he had any idea of the chaos and costly battle for his assets that would erupt after his passing, I'm certain that he would have given it all away before passing on. But so they say is life. So there you have it. Thank you for watching the video today. Please leave a like, subscribe, and until next time, Jah bless.